那么我们在进入今天的话题之前，我要非常感谢台湾的不当党产委员会赞助这一系列的影片，用你们的帮助，我才有办法到格但斯克介绍波兰转型正义的经验给台湾的观众。前面2集介绍中，各位跟着我看到这些导览，是不是觉得很有趣呢？其实台湾的民主发展历史跟波兰真的还蛮多可以互相借鉴的地方。当初波兰在规划这栋建筑物的时候，考虑的不只是将 ECS 博物馆当作是一个介绍当年团结工会的历史，还有近代发生在波兰的反波共的运动，同时也希望将这个经验作为人类争取自由的历史进行推广。人们跟他们的发想将可以在这栋多功能的建筑物中找到建立跟发展公民社会的空间。这是那些正走向世界未来的人们需要的聚会场所。ECS 博物馆将继续针对波兰、欧洲和世界的各种环境开展项目、会议、辩论、儿童和青少年的项目、戏剧表演，还有电影的播放，也可以3D 的形式，还有临时的展览。冬季花园全年开放，专为艺术活动、会议和休闲而设计。从春季到秋季，屋顶设有景观台，可以欣赏到后造船厂区以及老城区和主城区的美丽全景。而且 ECS 大楼它不只是做展览中心而已哦，它的17个空间也提供给自由和人权工作的非政府组织所使用。也就是说，希望让这栋建筑物也成为培养在人权等人文与社会议题上人才的土壤。也就是说，是一种允许经营的概念。我想这也是我们波兰能够提供给台湾朋友参考的一个地方。这是一个非常好的构想。对于以科技发展为主轴的台湾，我认为在培育人文思想上的环境也需要同时给予，营养均衡也是非常重要的。当然，如果能够因为这样子让波兰跟台湾有更多的交流，我认为这是更好的嘛。其实台湾近年来也设立几座与转型正义相关的博物馆，像是厄尔拜经验馆、国家人权博物馆等。但是因为台湾某些党派仍然大量的参与着台湾的政治核心，导致这些非常具有思想价值的博物馆没有办法在短时间内发挥他们的最大的社会功能。那今天我有邀请一位博物馆的专员来给我们做一些跟国有企业私有化的介绍。
But the problem Poland encountered was that because of the authoritarian rule and because of the centrally planned economy, it was very difficult to say where does the money of the Communist Party end and when does the budget of the state starts, because it was one thing. There was one party, but officially they were free.
And that's the point of today's interview,
yes.
Because Taiwanese, as a society, as a country, they're very interested in the transfer of, as they call it in Taiwan, ill-gotten party assets.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning that, of course, Communist Party being like Polish PZPR, mm-hmm. not being called communist, but still being as a core, as a communist party, right? Owning everything in the state, yes. Running the economy, making all of the decisions. Because in all of the enterprises, there were Communist Party officials, mm-hmm. just observing and looking and making decisions for them.
Yes.
And how do you bring the economy back to the people? That's the point.
And that was a big challenge that happens to all authoritarian rules. That because when there is no distinction between party budget and state budget, it's very difficult to say who gets what after the transition. And that's the first challenge. The second challenge is the only people that actually have some, maybe vague, but still some idea how to run a business are party officials.
Yeah.
Because they were the only ones trained.
Who were permitted to.
Permitted, but also trained
yeah.
in managing bigger companies, bigger factories, etc. So they had to remain to some extent because nobody else knew how to run, for instance, a factory or a big business, etc. And that created another problems. And these challenges became very visible in 1989, between 1989 and 1991, when a lot of businesses were privatized. There were some ideas to make them social cooperatives or workers' cooperatives, but they didn't succeed, and these plans were quickly abandoned. And then some of the critics say that then we had a process of wild privatization, that anyone who had some vague idea how to run a business could actually take it over. And these were quite often people connected to the Communist Party. So all of the state-owned factories also heavy industry, etc. They were transformed into free market entities, but under management of people connected to the previous regime. And that created a problem, and that also created political problems that we still sometimes see today, especially when it comes to kind of strategic branches of business, like the shipyard business. We are in Gdańsk at the seaside, and Poland in the 70s had the fifth largest shipping industry in the world. But in the early 1990s, many of these companies started to bankrupt because of poor management and because of this wild privatization that mostly, often helped with transferring the money outside. And for many years, those who had contacts with the former officials, they could actually do good businesses. Because, as you mentioned, I mean, everything was state-owned, like the company that distributed press, the company that produced paper, all the printing houses, not mentioning the media, etc., etc.
It probably was even more challenging to go through those democratization processes in Poland and in former Eastern Bloc countries, because there was a central economy comparing to Taiwan. Even though it was an authoritarian rule and a single party dictatorship, but at least Taiwan had market economy, and it was not the state that owned everything around it. So therefore, because we are making videos right now for the ill-gotten party asset committee in Taiwan, could you please explain the biggest difference between Taiwan, a country even though being an authoritarian dictatorship and with the Kuomintang party having those assets, and Poland, where all of the assets were actually party assets?
I think the biggest challenge, biggest difference is in the philosophy of the authoritarian rule. Because in Poland, as in the actually whole Eastern European bloc, the Communist Party from the beginning had an aspiration to control every aspect of your life. So it regulated not only the political life, obviously, but also any form of communication with censorship office, with the secret police, checking letters, listening to telephone conversations, but also having total control over economy, especially in the early decades in the 40s and 50s, and actually even in the 60s, with a huge there was a lot of energy devoted to industrialization. What was supposed to be the main foundation of the economy was heavy industry. So building, trains, ships, tanks, etc. With all of these small businesses being left aside. So, for instance, there was an idea, if you want to get an ice cream, now you can choose from different ice cream parlors, and you have a family business or a smaller chain or something like that. Under communist rule, the idea was that there would be one factory that would produce ice cream that would be later distributed throughout the country.
The whole country.
It never worked out in the end, but that's a different story. But the idea was to centralize as much as possible. And because then the communist authorities would have control over also the economy. Also, there were attempts to have control over people's behaviors. What was forced was communal eating. Like you would eat your lunch or a hot meal at your factory or at your school, and not at home. Or you would go to a cheap bar that would be subsidized also by the state, because it was thought that having this family life, it would help to create networks that would later could turn against the communist authorities. And that was the biggest, I think, difference between Taiwan and communist Poland and also other countries.
The last question for today. Have you ever been to Taiwan, and do you have anything to say to the Taiwanese viewers?
I've never been. I hope to come to Taiwan one day. But it's, actually what always strikes me is the very high similarities between our histories. Because not only time-wise, because the changes were happening more or less at the same time, but also the processes that happen. It's surprisingly similar. So I as I said, I hope to be able to come to Taiwan one day and witness it with my own eyes.
Thank you so much. We also hope that Taiwan and Poland can learn from each other and develop together. Okay, thank you, Grzegorz. Thank you so much for watching. 所以不当党产的处置这个议题这几年在台湾也算是很新的概念，但我认为时机已经到了。近年来，在台湾研究者与专家们共同努力搜集党国时期的各项证据、史料等结果下，已经有很多突破性的进展。当年有受到认识台湾等本土课程洗礼的新一代，也已经逐渐成为了社会的中坚力量，所以这个本土化的意识已经逐渐成熟。对于党国部分的威权、政治宣传、党国体制的全貌也有一定程度的了解，所以对于厘清历史的真相的态度也越来越明朗跟开放。随着国际环境的开放，台湾人也比过去有更多的机会认识1990年代以来同样是走出独裁专制体制的其他国家的过程的全貌。像是中东欧国家这30年淘汰威权的作风，都可以互相做比较、互相进步跟学习。这几年观察某一些政党与组织对于检讨过去与面对不当党产的处置，都是以撕裂社会跟政党追杀等抵抗形态去逃避过往的责任。事实上，台湾人想要的只是一个历史真相与迟来的正义。有些过去威权统治时期的执政党仍然在野的情况，跟我们波兰的状况是非常不同的。像是波兰有除垢法，基本上就是完全排除党国体制的加害者在民主体制的参政权，也就是说，这些过去的加害者是不能继续参与民主化之后的政治活动。所以说，台湾社会的宽容程度已经是令人惊讶的地步，但那些政党却没有好好珍惜这样宽容的社会。那些政党与他们的附属组织们，一方面表示所掌握的财产是靠他们自己的经营能力创造的财富，而不是靠着党国体制的各种政策而得利的结果；一方面又很矛盾的去抵制行政调查，甚至销毁资料。假使认为自己掌握的真相是对自己有利的，那更应该要公布更多的资料，并且积极的配合调查来厘清真相才对哦。而随着时间，不只是让转型正义跟不当党产的调查变得更加困难，党国时期对台湾人所加诸的不公不义却不愿意面对，反反复复的行为只会加深台湾社会对维权时期的不信任。毕竟党国部分与白色恐怖都是曾经的事实，这一点无论如何都是无法逃避的。团结工会在其纲领里面有写到，历史告诉我们，没有自由是没有面包，而我们心里不只有面包、奶油跟腊肠，还有正义、民主、真理、合法性、人性尊严、信念的自由，以及对共和国的改革。希望未来波兰跟台湾可以加强往来跟交流，互相学习，互相分享经验。当今的年轻台湾世代，就算没有经历过国家机器的恐怖威严的洗礼，但是现实生活当中有许多过去国家威权时期的血淋淋的案例，透过网络影片在大家的眼前放送。党国不分与白色恐怖都是曾经的事实，这一点无论如何都是无法逃避的。我也认为台湾会越来越好，台湾勇敢地面对过去，走出自己的未来，不要停留在谴责过去，而是放眼在台湾人所拥有的美好良善上。非常感谢各位的观看，我是斯坦，我们下次见，拜拜。